Well, I'm going to finish off by talking in a little bit more detail about something I alluded to earlier when we were discussing women in comics, and that is the phenomenon known as Comicsgate that really got rolling in 2016. Now, Comicsgate, obviously, that's, taken from Watergate in the mid 70s. Every controversy since then has had gate slapped on it. But more recently, Comicsgate is kind of an echo of what was known as Gamergate in 2014. That was when a bunch of angry white males started trolling online several women who were in the video game and computer game industry. This includes women who design games and women who are critics and reviewers of games. And by trolling, I don't mean that they took exception with, their criticism of a particular game. They took exception of the fact that they dared to have an opinion while also possessing a vagina. In essence, saying that women are ruining gaming, right? Because all this political correctness, and this quickly led to misogynistic attacks online and even threats of death and rape or combinations of the two. Well, that was pretty disgusting. Pretty disgusting. But it's more emblematic or perhaps symptomatic of wider issues in 21st century culture, especially where white men are concerned. Now, in the years leading up to the beginning of this controversy in 2016, there had been an increasing number of women involved in the comics industry at all the major publishers as writers and as artists and as editors. There had been more female characters introduced, and there had been a few cases of long standing male characters like Iron Man and Thor, and in a way, Spider Man, being replaced in those identities by women. This was true with the character known as Iron Heart, Riri Williams, and it's also true of Thor's former girlfriend and nurse Jane Foster gaining the power of Thor. And then you got Spider Gwen down there, which you might be familiar with as an alternate reality version of Spider-Man. So this was happening. Fans were getting upset, white male fans, getting upset that it's ruining their childhood because there's girls. There are female characters in positions not of submission, but in the tradition of the original Wonder Woman, positions of empowerment, not just being there as vehicles for the male character's story arc. All right. Well, things really got rolling, like I said, in 2016. But in the year or two before that, there had also been some controversial incidents where large numbers of female fans, and there are large numbers of female fans, had complained about the covers of a couple of comics in particular. A cover of an issue of Spider Woman that was drawn, and I guess what you might call a 1990s style, if you'll recall that hypersexualized way that women were often portrayed in the 90s. So one of those, and then there was also a cover on a Batgirl comic where she was being physically abused, threatened, grabbed from behind, and so forth. And female fans took exception to this and said, hey, it's the 21st century. In both of those cases, the covers were pulled and new covers were put in their place, and that upset some male fans. And then this happened in 2016. It was during the second Civil War storyline in 2016, an issue of Mockingbird, in which just the fact that she's wearing this t-shirt that says "Ask me about my feminist agenda" drove large numbers of these particularly inclined fans just nuts. And they started trolling Chelsea Kane, who was the female artist in charge and behind this. Then a few months later, there was a tweet from Heather Antos, who is an editor at Marvel, of herself and several Marvel staffers who happen to be women, with the hashtag Fabulous Flow. And by the way, don't you feel good about yourself and the fact that now you know what that means? So just a fun selfie at work of, these young women working together. And they started to be trolled. Heather Antos started to be trolled. People started to say things like, well, I can't repeat a lot of the things, but essentially these stereotypical SJWs, right? Social justice warriors that are ruining society with all their diversity, with all their enforced diversity. And folks like this, now I keep saying white males. I don't mean that all white males have these attitudes. Being a white male myself, and I didn't have these attitudes when I was younger either. But I do mean that almost all the people that have been out of shape about this tend to be white males. And they're not just upset about women. They're upset about other kinds of diversity. They're upset about the increasing number of African American characters, Asian American characters, Latinx characters, saying that it's being forced, it's a social agenda. Same kind of people, like I said before, who complained endlessly about the new Star Wars movies because one of the heroes was a woman, and then another one was an Asian woman, right? So an ironic thing about this is that these folks claim that comic books are being politicized by trying to enforce this liberal diversity agenda, when, if they knew anything at all about the medium, not just of comic books, but science fiction in general as well, and there's a movement of this among science fiction fans too, they would know that comic book stories have always been political, one way or another, and many of them over the years, from Siegel and Schuster and their version of Superman, to Harvey Kurtzman and his war stories, to Stan Lee and his stories about racial issues in the 1960s, and on and on and on and on, have dealt with these things. And for some reason, this particular subset of America wants to believe that it's something new and something insidious that must be stopped. And they're just nasty and abusive, threatening, and generally come off as pretty stupid, I think. So that's a sad statement about the condition of America in the late 20-teens. And I think it's just, like I said, a symptom of a much bigger issue that you can see all around you. All you have to do is look around. But it's also a sign, I believe, that those particular people feel threatened. And the reason they feel threatened is because the way things had always been is changing. The sense of power that such people feel in society is being undermined by the changes that are happening, and those people feel threatened by that and express those feelings of anxiety in this way. And that really, as loud as they are, the louder that they are, the more it betrays how scared they are. and how much things really are changing. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So, you know, superhero comics started as adolescent male fantasy, and for the most part have been white male fantasy for almost a century now. But comic books and even superheroes are no longer exclusively white male fantasy. They are also um, white female empowerment fantasy, and they are minority and diversity empowerment fantasy. And that's a good thing, and I believe it's going to continue. I certainly hope so. And I say, good. All right. Well, finally, I'm going to end on this slide, and the statement I have here with a question mark. Does that make it a statement or a question? American mythos. I think you can take the question mark off. I think that the superhero has become the American mythology, and that it has replaced the cowboy as such. And it is really, in many ways, akin to classical mythology from various cultures around the world. I also feel like the system of delivery of this mythology is changing. It's changing in a lot of ways. We've talked about the transition to graphic novels. You could also talk about the emphasis on the screen, to the extent that, like I said before, most people know these characters, well, maybe through video games, but mostly through television and movies, not through comic books. And then as well, there is what I've referred to as the beginning of the blue age of comics, starting in the year 2010, which is essentially a transition to digital comics being the primary source of delivery for the comics themselves, no longer necessarily confined to paper. And when it is in paper, it's more likely to be a graphic novel or a graphic novel like collection than individual comic books. But my point is, ultimately, none of that matters, none of that changes the essence of what comic books are and have been. It just changes, like I said, the physical delivery of this type of sequential art. And what has grown beyond sequential art and become, indeed, American mythology. So, think about that next time that you're watching one of those movies. Think about that the next time you're reading a comic book, which I hope will be soon, frequently, and consistently from here on out. Well, I've had a lot of fun talking about this stuff for roughly 40 hours, and I hope you have too. Now, what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to stop talking, but I have several slides here that I'm going to just let run in this final lecture video without commentary, just so that you can be reminded of some of the individuals from the second half of these lectures that I particularly want you to remember. And here a list of the major publishers from the beginning up until now. So refresh your memory, remember these, and take a moment, remember some of those artists and writers who have left this mortal coil, and acknowledge those who remain.